Hey, amazing viewers! Before we go into this riveting narrative, drop your location in the comments below. We love connecting with you all around the world. Also, if this is your first time here, press the subscribe button and join our incredible journey. Let's hit 10,000 subscribers this month together. Your support means everything. Shadows of silence. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a pale orange hue over the rooftops of the small village. In a modest house tucked away in a narrow lane, Rubina sat cross-legged on the floor, her school books open but untouched. The muffled voices of her parents arguing reached her ears again, a sound so frequent that it had become part of the background noise of her life. But tonight, something about the tone was sharper, the tension heavier, and the words colder. Rubina was only 10 years old, but she carried a weight far beyond her years. Her mother, Seima, was a quiet woman who moved through life like a ghost in her own home, trying to avoid her husband's anger while caring for her two daughters. Her father, Rashid, was a man trapped in the suffocating grip of his own expectations, a songless legacy that gnawed at his pride every day. His words, sharp as daggers, often left Seima in tears and Rubina in silent anguish. "Why don't you understand? You're useless." Rashid's voice boomed from the kitchen. "If you had given me a son, I wouldn't have to live with this shame. A man without a son is as good as dead." Seima's voice, trembling but firm, responded, "And yet, here I am, trying to hold this family together while you tear it apart. Our daughters are not a curse, Rashid. They're our blessing." Rubina's chest tightened as she hugged her knees. She couldn't understand why her father spoke so cruelly to her mother, but she knew she hated it. Her little sister, only 3 years old, slept soundly beside her, blissfully unaware of the turmoil that unfolded outside their room. A family torn. This wasn't the first time Rubina had witnessed her father's wrath. She remembered the nights when her mother would sit on the edge of their small bed, quietly sobbing, the marks of her father's anger etched into her skin or spirit. Despite the bitterness in their household, Seima had fought tooth and nail to send Rubina to school, a decision that sparked endless arguments with Rashid and his domineering mother. "She doesn't need an education," her grandmother had sneered when Seima first brought up the idea. "She'll get married and be someone else's problem. Why waste money?" But Seima was determined. "Education is the only thing that can give her a better life. I won't let her be trapped like me." Rubina, too young to understand the full depth of her mother's struggles, only knew that going to school made her mother smile, even if just a little. She studied hard, topping her class every year, hoping to repay her mother's sacrifices in ways she couldn't yet articulate. The day of the breaking point. On this particular evening, the fight reached a crescendo. Rashid's frustration boiled over, and before Seima could react, he pushed her out of the kitchen and onto the dusty courtyard. Rubina, who had been peeking through the crack in her door, froze. Her mother fell hard, her hands breaking the fall, but the pain was evident in her wince. Rubina felt her heart pounding, her small hands clutching the doorframe so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She wanted to run to her mother, to shield her from her father's anger, but fear rooted her to the spot. Then, something changed. Seima slowly looked up and saw her daughter standing there, her wide eyes glistening with unshed tears. For a moment, Seima felt as though time had stopped. The weight of all the pain and humiliation she had endured for years pressed down on her, and yet in her daughter's gaze, she saw something that surprised her. Determination. Rubina didn't cry or run away. Instead, she turned and disappeared into the house. Seima, still on the ground, wondered what her daughter was doing. Moments later, Rubina emerged, holding something in her small hands. It was wrapped in a faded piece of cloth, and she cradled it like a precious treasure. "Here, Mama," Rubina said, her voice steady but soft. "This will make everything better." Seima's heart skipped a beat as she stared at the bundle. For a moment, she thought it might be some toy or trinket, but the seriousness in her daughter's expression made her stomach churn with unease. Carefully, she reached out and took it. Unwrapping the cloth, Seima gasped. Inside was a tiny baby boy, no more than a few weeks old. His skin was soft and pink, and his tiny fists curled and uncurled as he squirmed slightly in the warmth of the fabric. "Rubina, what have you done?" Seima whispered, her voice trembling. "I brought him for you, Mama," Rubina said simply. "Now Papa won't be angry anymore. He'll stop shouting at you." Seima's mind raced as she stared at the infant in her hands. Where had her daughter found this child? Who did he belong to? Her immediate instinct was to protect Rubina, but panic clawed at her. If anyone found out, it could ruin them. The whispers of the village were relentless, and a scandal like this could destroy her family. A mother's desperate decision. Seima quickly pulled Rubina into the house, locking the door behind her. "Where did you get this baby, Rubina? Tell me the truth," she demanded, her voice harsher than she intended. Rubina hesitated, her lower lip quivering. "At school," she admitted. "I found him in the bathroom. He was crying and all alone. I thought if we had a baby boy, Papa would be happy." Seima's legs gave way, and she sank onto the floor, the baby still cradled in her arms. The weight of Rubina's words crushed her. She had always known her daughter was observant, but she hadn't realized just how much Rubina had absorbed. The fights, the insults, the blame. And now, this innocent child had become her daughter's desperate attempt to fix something that was never her responsibility to fix. "Rubina, listen to me," Seima said, gripping her daughter's shoulders tightly. "What you did, it was wrong. You can't just take a baby. Do you understand how serious this is?" Tears welled up in Rubina's eyes. "I just wanted to help, Mama. I didn't want you to cry anymore." Seima pulled her daughter into a tight embrace, her own tears spilling over. "Oh, my sweet girl, I know you meant well, but this isn't the way. We have to figure this out. Together." A race against time. As the night stretched on, Seima's mind raced with possibilities. She couldn't return the baby to the school. What if someone had seen Rubina take him? And what if they assumed the baby was hers? The judgment and shame would be unbearable. The only option was to keep the child hidden, at least for now. She decided to take the baby to her mother's house. Just a short walk away. Her mother would understand, Seima told herself. She always did. Wrapping the baby tightly in the cloth, Seima kissed Rubina on the forehead. "Stay here and don't tell anyone about this. I'll be back soon." Rubina nodded, her eyes wide with worry. "Will Papa find out?" Seima hesitated. "No, not if we're careful." Slipping out into the quiet night, Seima made her way to her mother's house, her heart pounding with every step. She prayed silently, not just for herself, but for her daughters, and now for the baby boy who had unwittingly become part of their lives. Secrets in the shadows. The night air was cold and carried the faint scent of earth and wood smoke as Seima made her way to her mother's house. Each step felt heavier than the last, her heart pounding like a drumbeat in her chest. The tiny baby in her arms squirmed occasionally, his small noises reminding her of the gravity of the situation. The village was silent, with only the occasional bark of a stray dog breaking the stillness. Seima's mother, Noor, lived just a short distance away, but even the brief walk felt like an eternity. Noor's home, a humble structure with cracked walls and a rusted metal gate, had always been a place of solace for Seima. Tonight, however, it felt like she was carrying the weight of the world to its doorstep. A mother's comfort. Noor was surprised to see her daughter at such an odd hour, but one look at Seima's face, and she knew something was wrong. Without a word, she ushered Seima inside, locking the door behind her. Seima placed the baby on a soft quilt Noor kept on the floor and collapsed onto a low wooden stool, burying her face in her hands. "Seima," Noor said gently, sitting beside her. "What is going on? Whose baby is this?" Seima struggled to find the words. How could she explain the whirlwind of events that had brought her here? She looked at the baby, his tiny chest rising and falling as he slept, and then at her mother, who waited patiently with concern etched into her face. "This baby, Rubina brought him home," Seema finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She found him at school and thought. She thought if we had a baby boy, Rashid would stop blaming me. She wanted to make him happy." Noor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Rubina, that poor child. She's trying to fix things she shouldn't even understand. Oh, Seema, what have they done to you, to her?" Seema's tears spilled over. "I don't know what to do. Ami, if anyone finds out, they'll think the baby is Rubina's. The shame, the gossip, it will destroy her future." Noor reached over and placed a comforting hand on her daughter's arm. "We'll figure this out together, Beta. But first, let's make sure this baby is safe. He's not to blame for any of this." A plan begins to form. As Seema explained everything that had happened, the fights, the abuse, the sudden arrival of the school principal and police, Noor listened intently. She shook her head in anger when Seema described Rashid's cruelty and the impossible expectations placed upon her. "Men like Rashid will never be satisfied," Noor said firmly. "Even if you gave him 10 sons, he would find something else to complain about. But right now, we need to focus on protecting Rubina and this baby." Noor rummaged through a small trunk and pulled out some clothes and a feeding bottle left behind by Seema's younger sister, who had recently visited with her own newborn. She carefully dressed the baby and prepared some milk, her experienced hands moving swiftly. The baby latched onto the bottle hungrily, and Noor smiled despite the heavy atmosphere. "This little one doesn't deserve to be abandoned," Noor said softly. "But we can't keep him here forever. Do you think the school knows Rubina brought him home?" Seema nodded, her anxiety spiking. "The principal and the police came to our house today. They didn't say it outright, but I could tell they suspect her. If Rashid finds out..." Noor held up a hand to stop her. "Then we must act quickly. We need to find a way to return this baby without implicating Rubina. And we need to make sure that Rashid never learns about any of this." Tension builds at home. As the first light of dawn began to creep into the sky, Seema left her mother's house and returned home with a heavy heart. She had left the baby in Noor's care for the time being, knowing it was the safest place for him. But now she had to face Rashid, who was already stirring in the other room. Rubina was still asleep, her face peaceful despite the storm brewing around her. Seema gently brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead, her heart aching with love and worry. She whispered a silent prayer for strength before heading to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. When Rashid appeared in the doorway, his expression was as stern as ever. He sat at the table, his arms crossed, watching Seema move around the small space. "You've been quiet," he said finally. "What's going on?" Seema froze for a moment, but quickly composed herself. "Nothing, Rashid. Just tired." Rashid narrowed his eyes but said nothing more. His silence was unnerving, but Seema knew better than to push her luck. She served him his breakfast and retreated to the corner of the room, her hands trembling as she folded a dishcloth. An unexpected visitor. Just as the day seemed to settle into its uneasy rhythm, there was a knock at the door. Seema's heart sank. She wasn't expecting anyone, and the memory of the principal and police from the day before made her blood run cold. She opened the door cautiously and was relieved to see Nazma, the neighborhood gossip, standing there with her usual nosy grin. But relief quickly turned to dread as Nazma pushed past her into the house, her sharp eyes scanning the room. "I heard some interesting news," Nazma said, settling herself into a chair uninvited. "It seems there's been a scandal at the school." Seema forced a smile, trying to appear uninterested. "What kind of scandal?" "Oh, don't play dumb," Nazma said with a chuckle. "Everyone's talking about it. A baby was found in the school bathroom. Can you believe it? A baby. And now they're saying one of the students might be involved." Seema's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She kept her voice steady as she replied, "That's terrible. But I'm sure it's just rumors. People love to talk. Nazma leaned in conspiratorially. Rumors or not, the police are involved. I heard they're questioning students and their families. If you ask me, someone's hiding something. Seima felt her stomach churn. She knew Nazma's love for gossip could easily spiral into something dangerous. She needed to steer the conversation away from Rubina without arousing suspicion. Well, let's hope they find out the truth soon, Seima said, forcing a laugh. But I'm sure it's nothing to worry about. Nazma looked unconvinced, but eventually rose to leave. We'll see, she said with a sly smile. You know how these things tend to come out eventually. As soon as the door closed behind her, Seima let out a shaky breath. She knew she was running out of time. A mother's determination. That night, as the household settled into an uneasy quiet, Seima sat by Rubina's bedside. Her daughter stirred in her sleep, murmuring softly. Seima stroked her hair, tears streaming down her face. She thought of the baby at Noor's house, of the danger Rubina was in, and of the life she had endured with Rashid. For the first time in years, a spark of defiance flared within her. She would protect her daughter at all costs. She would find a way to return the baby safely and shield Rubina from the consequences of her innocent mistake. And perhaps, she thought, it was time to start standing up to Rashid, not just for herself, but for her daughters. They deserved a life free from fear and shame. With her mind made up, Seima rose and prepared herself for the battles ahead. The road would not be easy, but she was determined to walk it. Whispers of courage. The morning sun rose lazily over the village, bathing the rooftops in soft hues of gold and orange. The stillness of dawn carried with it a deceptive calm that Seima found suffocating. Inside her modest home, the walls seemed to close in on her, amplifying the storm brewing in her heart. She was running out of time. Every passing second felt like a noose tightening around her neck. Rubina sat quietly at the breakfast table, pushing her food around her plate with a fork. Her little sister chattered happily beside her, oblivious to the weight hanging in the air. Rashid sat across from them, his sharp eyes scanning the newspaper, though Seima suspected he wasn't reading. He was observing, watching for cracks in the carefully constructed facade she had built over the years. Seima's mind raced as she forced herself to appear calm. She had to protect Rubina. She had to find a way to return the baby to safety without implicating her daughter. But first, she needed to navigate the delicate minefield of her household. The burden of silence. Rubina's usually bright demeanor had dimmed since the incident. Seima noticed the way her daughter avoided meeting her father's gaze, how she clung to her books as if they were a shield. Rubina's silence was a double-edged sword. It kept the secret safe, but it also weighed heavily on her young shoulders. Rubina, Seima said gently, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. Are you feeling okay? You haven't eaten much. Rubina looked up, her eyes wide and uncertain. I'm fine, Mama. Just tired. Rashid's voice cut through the moment like a blade. Tired? From what? You go to school, come home, and sit around. What do you have to be tired about? Seima clenched her fists under the table, forcing herself to remain calm. She's a growing girl, Rashid. School can be exhausting. Rashid scoffed but said nothing more. Seima knew better than to push her luck. She quickly gathered the plates and retreated to the kitchen, where she busied herself with chores, her mind spinning with plans. A secret visit. Later that afternoon, while Rashid was out running errands, Seima decided to visit her mother again. She needed to see the baby and finalize a plan to return him without drawing attention to Rubina. She told her daughters to stay inside and keep the door locked, then slipped out quietly. Noor greeted her with a worried expression when she arrived. The baby was sleeping soundly in a makeshift crib, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Seeing him so peaceful brought a lump to Seima's throat. Ami, Seima began, sitting down beside her mother. I've been thinking. We need to involve the police, but we have to do it in a way that doesn't lead back to Rubina. Noor nodded slowly. You're right. But how do we explain the baby without raising suspicion? Seima hesitated, then said, "We'll say we found him abandoned." That's the truth, isn't it? We just won't say where or how. Noor frowned. It's risky, Beta. What if someone saw Rubina that day? What if they connect the dots? Seima looked down at her hands, her voice trembling. I can see another way. Ami, the longer we keep him, the more dangerous it becomes. For all of us. Noor sighed heavily, but didn't argue. She understood the desperation in her daughter's voice. Together, they began to prepare for the next steps, their hearts heavy with uncertainty. The rumors begin. Back at home, Rubina sat by the window, her fingers nervously tracing patterns on the glass. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Her mother had been gone longer than usual, and the weight of her secret felt like it was crushing her. Her little sister played with a worn doll in a corner, blissfully unaware of the turmoil around her. Rubina envied her innocence, wishing she could go back to a time when the world seemed simpler. A sudden knock at the door startled them both. Rubina froze, her heart racing. She peered through the window and saw Nazma, the neighborhood gossip, standing on the porch with a curious expression. Rubina hesitated, then opened the door just enough to speak. Auntie Nazma, Mama isn't home right now. Nazma leaned in, her eyes narrowing. Where has she gone? She seems to be out a lot these days. Rubina shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. I don't know. She didn't tell me. Nazma smirked, her tone dripping with curiosity. Strange things have been happening lately, haven't they? That baby at the school. People are saying it just vanished. No one knows where it went. Rubina's stomach churned. She forced herself to smile politely. I wouldn't know anything about that, Auntie. Mama says not to listen to rumors. Nazma's eyes lingered on her for a moment before she stepped back. Well, tell your mother I stopped by. And remember, Rubina, secrets have a way of coming out. Rubina closed the door quickly, her hands trembling. She leaned against it, her chest heaving, as she tried to calm herself. She knew Nazma's words were more than idle gossip. They were a warning. A father's doubts. When Seima returned home that evening, she found Rashid sitting in the courtyard, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. He looked up as she entered, his gaze sharp and probing. Where have you been? He asked, his voice deceptively calm. Seima hesitated, then said, I went to see Ami. She wasn't feeling well. Rashid's eyes narrowed. You've been acting strange lately. Is there something you're not telling me? Seima forced a smile. There's nothing, Rashid. You're just imagining things. He stood and approached her, his towering presence making her feel small. Don't lie to me, Seima. I can tell when something isn't right. Seima's heart raced, but she held her ground. I'm not lying. You're being paranoid. Rashid studied her for a moment longer, then turned and walked away. Seima exhaled shakily, grateful that he hadn't pressed further. But she knew his suspicions were growing, and it was only a matter of time before he discovered the truth. A risky move. That night, Seima sat by Rubina's bedside, watching her daughter sleep. She gently brushed a strand of hair from her face, her heart aching with love and worry. Rubina, she whispered, her voice breaking. I promise I'll fix this. You don't have to carry this burden. The next morning, Seima made her way to the police station with the baby wrapped in a shawl. She had decided to take the risk and report the baby as abandoned, hoping it would end the nightmare that had consumed their lives. When she arrived, the officers listened to her story with skeptical eyes. They asked her to explain where she had found the baby, why she hadn't reported it sooner. Seima stuck to her story, repeating it with as much conviction as she could muster. Finally, one of the officers nodded. We'll take it from here, ma'am. If we find the parents, we'll let you know. As Seima handed the baby over, tears streamed down her face. She kissed his tiny forehead one last time, whispering a silent prayer for his future. When she left the station, her heart felt lighter, but the fear of what might come next still lingered. She had done what she could to protect her daughter. Now, All she could do was hope. The weight of truth. The air was heavy with unease as Seema walked back from the police station. Each step felt like an eternity, the sound of her sandals scraping against the uneven path echoing in her ears. She had done the right thing, or so she told herself. The baby was now in the hands of the authorities, but the fear of repercussions weighed heavily on her. What if someone saw her? What if the police connected Rubina to the baby? As Seema approached her home, she noticed the door slightly ajar. Her heart leaked into her throat. Rashid was inside, pacing the small living room, his expression dark and stormy. He stopped when he saw her enter. "Where were you?" he demanded, his voice sharp enough to slice through her composure. Seema swallowed hard, steeling herself. "I went to the market. We were out of flour," she lied, holding up the empty cloth bag she had carried to the station as proof. Rashid's gaze bore into her, suspicion evident in his eyes. "You've been acting strange, Seema. Don't think I haven't noticed. If there's something you're hiding." "There's nothing," she interrupted, her voice trembling. "I'm just tired, Rashid. Please, let it go." He stared at her for a moment longer before turning away with a huff. "Fine, but I'll find out if you're lying to me." Seema exhaled shakily, her knees nearly giving way beneath her. She had narrowly avoided his wrath, but she knew it was only a matter of time before his suspicions turned into accusations. Rubina's secret guilt. In the days that followed, Rubina became increasingly withdrawn. She avoided her father at all costs, spending most of her time in her room or at school. Seema could see the guilt eating away at her daughter, the weight of her secret pressing down on her young shoulders. One evening, as Seema prepared dinner, she noticed Rubina sitting quietly at the kitchen table, her eyes fixed on her hands. "Rubina," Seema said gently, sitting down beside her. "What's wrong, Beta?" Rubina looked up, her eyes brimming with tears. "Mama, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause so much trouble. I wanted Papa to stop being angry with you." Seema pulled her daughter into a tight embrace, her own tears spilling over. "You did nothing wrong, Rubina. You have such a kind heart, and I'm proud of you for that. But sometimes the world is more complicated than we realize." Rubina sobbed into her mother's shoulder, the weight of her guilt slowly lifting as Seema reassured her. "We'll get through this, my love. Together." The gossip spreads. Meanwhile, the village buzzed with rumors about the baby. Nazma, true to her nature, had taken it upon herself to piece together the story, embellishing it with every retelling. "I heard the baby was found near Seema's house," she whispered to a group of women gathered at the well. "And isn't it strange how quiet she's been lately? Makes you wonder, doesn't it?" The women exchanged knowing glances, their curiosity piqued. It wasn't long before the whispers reached Rashid's ears. One evening, as Seema was putting the younger daughter to bed, Rashid stormed into the room. His face was red with anger, his fists clenched at his sides. "Is it true?" he barked. "Did you have something to do with that baby everyone's talking about?" Seema froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She forced herself to remain calm, to choose her words carefully. "I don't know what you're talking about, Rashid. People will say anything to stir up trouble." He stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't lie to me, Seema. If I find out you've been hiding something." "I haven't," she snapped, surprising even herself with the force of her words. "I've done nothing wrong, Rashid. You're letting gossip get to your head." Rashid stared at her for a long moment before turning on his heel and leaving the room. Seema sank to the floor, her body trembling with relief and fear. She had managed to deflect his anger for now, but she knew it was only a temporary reprieve. A community divided. As the days turned into weeks, the village became divided over the incident. Some believed the baby's appearance was a result of immoral behavior at the school, while others dismissed it as a rumor blown out of proportion. The tension in the community was palpable, and the school became the center of scrutiny. The principal, desperate to protect the school's reputation, called a meeting with the parents. Seima attended reluctantly, her heart heavy with dread. She sat in the back of the room, avoiding eye contact with anyone. "We assure you all that the school is taking this matter very seriously," the principal said, her voice firm. "We are working closely with the authorities to determine what happened and ensure it never happens again." A murmur spread through the crowd, parents whispering among themselves. Seima felt the weight of their judgment, even though none of them knew the truth. As the meeting ended, Nazma approached Seima with a sly smile. "You've been awfully quiet lately," she said. "Anything you'd like to share?" Seima forced a smile, her voice steady. "I have nothing to share, Nazma. Maybe you should focus on your own family instead of poking around in other people's business." Nazma's smirk faltered, and she quickly walked away. Seima felt a small surge of satisfaction, but knew it wouldn't last. A husband's transformation. One evening, as Seima prepared dinner, Rashid entered the kitchen. His demeanor was different, calmer, almost apologetic. He sat down at the table, watching her silently as she worked. "Seima," he said finally, his voice soft. "I've been thinking about how I've treated you, about the things I've said." Seima froze, the knife in her hand hovering over a tomato. She turned to face him, her expression guarded. "What are you saying, Rashid?" He looked down at his hands, as if ashamed. "I've been wrong. I've been cruel to you, and to the girls. I've let my frustration and pride blind me." Seima stared at him, unsure if she could believe his words. "What brought this on?" she asked cautiously. Rashid sighed. "When the principal and the police came, I realized how close we were to losing everything. I've been so focused on what I thought I wanted that I forgot to appreciate what I have." Seima felt tears welling in her eyes, but blinked them away. She didn't know if Rashid's change of heart was genuine or fleeting, but it was the first time in years he had shown any vulnerability.